Hello, and welcome to the Patient Engagement Open Forum panel on shared clinical decision-making in precision medicine. My name is Helena Harnick, and I'm the Executive Director of the From Testing to Targeted Treatments Program, FT3, a global, collaborative, not-for-profit, multi-stakeholder initiative to make precision medicine an accessible reality for patients. If you're new to the Patient Engagement Open Forum, its goal is to support meaningful and systemic patient engagement, helping patients and other stakeholders come together to collaborate on practical solutions to maximize patient engagement. Today, it is a global event that attracts a growing audience with a reach of over 1.5 million people. Next slide, please. The session today will be in a panel format with some opportunities for the audience to participate and ask questions. There is a Q&A feature that allows you to ask questions to the panelists. We will do our best to answer these questions as we move ahead, and we will try to save some time at the end to be able to address these questions as well. Next slide, please. Before introducing the panelists, I wanted to set the scene for why this topic is important for the FT3 program. In FT3, our aim is to act as a global accelerator in precision medicine, identifying global learnings and good practices and turning them into practical tools and solutions to advance patient access to precision medicine at the local level. We are bringing together different stakeholders, including patients, healthcare professionals, companies, and beyond, to develop solutions to reach three goals. The first goal is that precision medicine is accepted by decision makers at the health system level. The second goal is that precision medicine is implemented at the healthcare delivery level. And the third goal is to have a unified and accelerated precision medicine ecosystem working together to be able to reach this shared vision. The session today is focusing on goal 2, the implementation at the healthcare delivery level. And one of the main barriers that has been identified by the FT3 community of practice has been shared decision-making in clinical practice. One of our priorities is to better understand the gaps in good practices when it comes to shared decision-making and to be able to demonstrate the value of shared decision-making in practice. So this brings us to our panel, and I'm delighted to welcome 4 amazing panelists joining us today. We start with Meryl Henning, who is a patient who was diagnosed with a rare form of lung cancer in 2014. She is a patient advocate active in several organizations, including the Ros Wonders, Lung Cancer Europe, International Association for the Study of Lung Cancer, ASCO, and EMA. I'd like to invite Meryl to introduce herself briefly.
Yes, thank you very much for the invite today. And for me, especially with an oncogene-driven cancer, shared decision-making is so much more important today. This topic gets more important because there are going to be more treatment options. And if you want to have an option, you need to know what option is best for you. Health literacy and also shared decision-making are key, but also a challenge. And I'm delighted to speak here today and to learn from other panelists.
Great, thank you so much, Meryl. Next is Luciana Holtz de Camargo Barros, who is the founder and president of OncoGuia, an internationally recognized cancer advocacy organization in Sao Paulo, Brazil, that supports patients and their families. She is a psycho-oncologist with a specialization in bioethics and health literacy. Luciana, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Elena, great pleasure to be here. As you already mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of OncoGuia, a national advocacy cancer organization here in Brazil. For us, it's a great opportunity to be here, especially with these panelists, to learn, to share, and of course to discuss about how important it is to talk about the precision medicine that is completely changing the patient reality in all globally. So thank you for this opportunity, Elena.
Thank you, Luciana. And next we have Dr. Marius Gianta, who is a medical doctor by background. He is a pioneer in precision medicine in Central and Eastern Europe. He has contributed to the Special Committee on Beating Cancer and Cancer Mission Consultations and has also contributed to the National Cancer Control Plan in Romania, which was approved recently by Parliament. Marius, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, Helena. You mentioned already a lot of my activities. I would just like to add my role as part of the International Consortium for Personalized Medicine. I'm the lead reconfirmed today, of the working group on engagement, empowerment, and education. And I'm very much looking forward for the today discussion.
Thank you so much, Marius. And last but not least, we have Rod Padua, who has become a patient advocate when his son was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, CML, a rare pediatric disease. And Rod is the president of the Touched by Max in Philippines. Thank you. Rod, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you, Elena. Well, I just like to add that it has been quite a challenge to engage members of different disciplines into the medical space. But because we are either patients or caregivers, or just simply we know somebody who has cancer, we are committed to absorb as much as we can regarding the disease.
Thanks so much, Rod. So before we get started, we want to hear from you, and we will be using Slido to ask you 2 questions to help set the scene before we start. If you can move to the next slide, please. And one more. And the first question is, what does shared clinical decision-making mean to you? And what you can do is use your phone to scan the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and enter in the code 3280916. And we will give you a minute or 2 to answer this question. And you can choose the option that you think fits the best. So I can see some people starting to answer now. So we have 4 different possible answer choices. The patient is empowered to understand the impact of a decision and give consent before the healthcare professional proceeds with the care plan. The patient decides on their care. The healthcare professional asks the patient for confirmation before deciding on, for example, a new treatment, or you don't know. So select the one that works the best. You can see numbers are growing. Just give a few more seconds here before we move on, but we can see that the first one is winning in terms of popularity. So the patient is empowered to understand the impact of a decision and gives consent before the healthcare professional proceeds with the care plan. That seems to be the one that the audience finds most appropriate. And if we can move to the next question, please. So we have another question, which is to understand if you think that clinical shared decision-making is regularly happening between healthcare providers and patients in the areas where you work or live. And you have 4 possible choices: no, yes, depends on the patient or healthcare professional, or depends on the healthcare system. So people are reacting quickly this time. Many people says that it depends on the patient or the healthcare professional. Very interesting. And also quite a few people saying no. And no one's saying yes. That's quite interesting. Gives us lots of food for discussion today. Okay, well, I think we will move on forward. So thank you very much for your participation, and there will be another opportunity for you to participate at the end. So keep that Slido poll open. So now we can move on to the panel. So I have my first question, and this question is for Marius. I'd be really curious, Marius, to understand how you would describe the provider-patient relationship today when it comes to clinical decision-making.
Depends. I think this is the keyword coming from the second question. Depends on the way healthcare is organized. Depends on the healthcare professional. Depends on the patient. Of course, I'm a medical doctor, as you introduced me, and we have been teaching the medical university that this is your patient. This is my patient. And now with this new era of digital tools, era of data, era of genomics, we cannot imagine the same patriarchal type of relationship between us, medical doctors, and patients. It's clear that this relationship is debalanced still in the favor of the medical professionals. But I think under the pressure of the genomics, of the data, of precision medicine, I think the patients will be in the position to come with more data, more information, and to have like an equilibrium in this relation between doctors and patients.
Thank you, Maria. So there you're describing the general trend, and I'm curious, Luciana, from your perspective, how you feel the oncologist is prepared. So as a psycho-oncologist, what are your perspectives on this, how the oncologist is prepared for this kind of shift in participation between the healthcare professional and patient?
Yes, Elena. I think the oncologist is not prepared for this new patient. And because of that, we need to have different strategies for this. I think we already do these strategies, but we need to put them into practice. Of course, with this advancement of the internet and different ways to access information, and also through the contact that the patient have with NGOs, now the patient is more informed and gradually becomes more prepared and participates in their own care. Well, as I said, many doctors are still not prepared for this new patient who is more likely to ask questions, more activity in their own treatment. Our strategies has been to involve the doctors in all process, especially in patient education. For example, in our social media lives, videos to better explain the disease and treatment, so the doctor feels involved and responsible for these new types of patients. The doctors also needs to take time during the consultation to explain the treatments, but also to listen and let the patient ask and give their opinion. Of course, this requires preparation, planning, and availability on the part of the doctor and their team, who also have a role and can help. I think this is so important.
Thank you so much, Luciana. And so you have started to describe what it actually looks like, what clinical shared decision-making looks like. But I'm curious to understand, Meryl, from your perspective, why clinical shared decision-making is so important, and perhaps why specifically in the context of precision oncology or precision medicine.
Well, if you have options, then you have to ask what all the options that are available, and sometimes the doctor always also makes his own decision which options are getting to the patient, and the patient needs to ask what kind of pros and cons are with the options, and he also has to ask, and what is the impact for me as an individual? And these are three very well, easy questions to ask, but most important is that a lot of doctors don't speak the language of a patient, and they can't understand the information that it's given by a doctor, and they are afraid or are ashamed, and they don't ask what the doctor means. So there's also a lack of understanding.
And so you mentioned the lack of understanding of the patient, and I'm curious, Marius, from your perspective as a medical doctor by training, what can be done in terms of how to address these kinds of challenges?
Yes, I think I'm in kind of favorable position because I have 20 years of experience in health communication as well. So probably for me, it's easier than for other medical doctors or doctors to explain to the citizen, to the patient, things that are probably some of the times almost impossible to explain. Just to give you one example, was a big challenge in actually 2 years ago in 2020 when the messenger RNA vaccines come into the market. Was very difficult for the media in Romania to identify a person able to explain what is it all about the messenger RNA. So what I think is important is to find a way to personalize the communication and to not reduce the communication about personalized medicine, about precision medicine and genomics, to not to reduce to basics, because you, in fact, what you are going to do is to reduce the value of the genomics and precision medicine to the basics. In other words, you should adapt to the person, to the audience you have in front of you. People are different. People have different levels of education. They have different levels of, I don't know, of empathy. They have certain attitude and perceptions and beliefs related to the healthcare, related to the disease, and all of this actually influence the way they perceive and they understand a certain information you provide. So you should be able somehow to have like a map of each individual, and to try to find the right way. If you have a more empathic person in front of you, you can use a more emotional approach. If you have somebody that is reluctant, you should be able first to address what are the reasons for that person to be reluctant or hesitant, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say, we discuss about precision medicine, personalized medicine. I think the personalized communication is a key, and I think it's a key success factor for personalized medicine. It's not easy to achieve this, but I think it's mandatory to move as well when it comes to communication from one size fits all to a more personalized and stratified approach.
So just as precision medicine is about putting the patient at the center, it's about, in communications as well, about putting the patient at the center. So that's very interesting. And Rod, from your perspective, why is shared clinical decision-making important? And what can you share in terms of where we are today when it comes to shared clinical decision-making in the Philippines?
Well, patients, especially in low middle income countries, would like to say nothing about us without us. And in the Philippines, it's more of a teacher pupil setup when it comes to when the patient goes into a clinic. He's supposed to just listen to his doctor, but times are changing because of the internet. Now, I agree with Marius that the key here is how the physician accepts the knowledge of the patient in his space, in his medical space. The more that they can interact intelligently and with respect to one another, the more there would be success in both for them.
Thank you so much, Rod. And Luciana, from your perspective in Brazil, where are you today when it comes, or where do you feel healthcare professionals and patients, the dynamic between them, where do you feel you are today when it comes to shared decision-making in clinical practice?
Well, Elena, we really need to improve this conversation and this process a lot. We know that it's new for the patient to be included in this type of conversation. So again, it's so important to educate, to let them know about all this information, and to guarantee that they are enough prepared, enough informed, enough secure to let the doctor know how it is their priorities, how it is important to be considered at the final decision. So in our opinion here, we are educating a lot the patient, offering the best quality information to guarantee that they are really prepared, and of course for them to know that it is their right to be involved in the final decision, because it is their life. We are talking about their own life, and so this is so important.
Great. So this kind of catchphrase from Rod, "Nothing about us without us," applies, it sounds like, to Brazil as well. And for Meryl and Marius, I'm curious because it was quite telling in the poll at the beginning that no one was answering that yes, clinical shared decision making is happening. You know, what's your experience in Central and Eastern Europe and in the Netherlands and the areas where you work?
Yes, the experience is quite limited, and you, Helena, mentioned at the beginning the three priorities, the three pillars you have, and the first one is the precision medicine to be accepted, and I think we are in this phase in Central Eastern Europe, and we are in this phase from societal perspective, as well from decision makers' perspectives, as well from healthcare professionals. Are a few oncologists that are, I think, advanced in the implementation of the precision medicine, and especially the ones who had the chance to be part of the clinical trials that are using the comprehensive genomic profiling and this type of test in order to identify the patients that fit certain clinical trial requirements. So they are advanced. But overall, I think we are in the phase of increasing the awareness and acceptance. We measured this in 2016. Around 33% was the awareness rate for personalized medicine term in Romania, increased to 38% in 2018, and then decreased again in 2020. Was between 2018 and 2020 when we identified the infodemia. A lot of people actually started to communicate about cancer and in general and precision medicine, but for the citizen was very difficult to identify the high value information in this very crowded environment. And what we identified actually before the pandemic, this infodemia phenomenon was actually then during the pandemic confirmed by what we have seen. Just to add that we are now in the position, and I'm working with one member of our parliament, because you mentioned, Luciana, the word right. We are working for a law on the right to personalized medicine of the Romanian citizen. Why, if all the stakeholders were open to personalized medicine, to precision medicine, myself, I'm speaking about 10 years about this topic. But if the precision medicine become part of their DNA in the meantime, this nowadays will be a reality, but it's not the case. So we have to act through a law to define this as a right to personalized medicine. Maybe we'll have the chance to enter into more details on this in order to set the right frame and then to start building on this, the implementation, the second phase, the implementation of precision personalized medicine.
That's very interesting how Romania is considering the legal basis as a way to ensure access. I think definitely that's something that we can perhaps explore more at a later date. I wanted to come back to Meryl and something that we have been discussing in the FD3 program, as you are aware, that it's very important to consider very different backgrounds of patients, including their preferences and their different readiness levels to engage with the healthcare team. So when we talk about shared decision-making, we kind of assume that that's something that everyone will want to do. I'm just curious how you have experienced this in practice.
My own experience or the experience of other patients?
Well, perhaps both. Perhaps both, yeah.
Okay. Well, my own experience was when I was diagnosed in 2014, there were no other options for me available. So I searched for myself, and that was in a not an expertise center. And then I went to an expertise center, but I was very active myself, and I knew from the Ros Wonders and I knew from all kind of platforms what was available and what was good for me. So I searched the hospital to get my treatment, but that's not the way it goes for most of the patients. Where in the Netherlands, we have expertise centers, and everyone with a rare oncogene-driven cancer, lung cancer, is being treated in one of the expertise centers. So the doctors have the knowledge and they know all the options. But I don't, in my hospital now in the expertise center, it's shared decision making in an optimum format. We always have a conversation about what is good for me and what's available and how do I get it. But I don't know in other hospitals whether or not there is a fully shared decision making, but I'm very glad with my hospital.
And perhaps I can open that question up to the other panelists as well, how you have experienced different preferences of patients in terms of how much they want to be involved. Like, are they ready to be involved? Do they even have a desire to be involved? Is that an issue that we need to consider? And maybe this comes back, Marius, to your point about the need for personalized communications as well.
Yes, exactly. And another, because I spoke about infodemia, we identify with our studies. And the second phenomenon is actually the fatalism. A very high rate, around 50% of the Romanian population, not patients. They believe that actually cancer means death all the time, which is not true from a scientific point of view. But what is very important to your point, Meryl, imagine a person that believes that cancer means death, is in the position, has early symptoms, and is in the position, to search for a doctor, for a hospital, to be diagnosed, to have a precise diagnosis, maybe to look then for treatment. But having this very high level of fatalism, actually this prevent that person to search for the right options. So that's why I'm really concerned, and we are looking very carefully to all these social sciences data and individual behavioral data that influence the access of a person to innovation, because we'll be in the position to have a lot of drugs on the market. Is the case as well in our country. We'll have as well access to more biomarker testing and genomics. But if people are not educated, if they are not well informed to know that all these innovations are available, all these innovation already changed the face. Just to give you one example of melanoma or lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer. You can imagine, if they are not aware, they will not look for the solutions, and they are condemned actually to death. And yes, this is a big task, and this part, as you said, Helena, to this broad concept of personalized communication, who is actually starting in our concept with a deep assessment of the factors that influence the individual behavior. Could be factors related to the family, to the very close friends, as well in small communities, small counties. Is the community with some leaders there, priests or educators and so on, that can influence individuals in health? And is this informational space the macro dimension of this, who is influenced by traditional media, by television, by social media influencers? So if you want to be successful in order to implement a campaign based on personalized communication, you should first be able to have this very deep assessment of the target group in order to understand them at the individual level. Because if you understand this, then it will be for you much easier to identify if it's an issue at micro level, at meso level, and who are the influencers and who is the best person to be targeted by this campaign in order to obtain the change you like to obtain.
So from what I understand, it's really about understanding the patient and their specific context, which might be them individually, but also in the kind of familial context that they're in.
Yes, maybe to add a bit on this point, because my understanding of precision and personalized medicine is not just moving from the old traditional way of a doctor seeing a patient like a biological, like something biologic, without the social emotional dimension. The biggest mistake will be to move from this picture to the picture where this biological dimension is very well defined by the new tools, but not considering all the other health determinants. I think the personalized medicine should include, of course, all the available tools that we have in order to better characterize for molecular and biological point of view a person and a cancer, but as well to include all these social individual factors that, as you can see, play a major role.
This is absolutely fascinating. And I'm curious, and Rod, when we had spoken before, you had spoken about the importance of health literacy as well. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, well, as we have mentioned earlier tonight, the information is out there. The internet is chock full of information, whether it's true or not, or anything in between. Now, the challenge would be sometimes, and in the Philippines, because we are made up of many islands, the level of education is different from the rural areas to example in Manila. So we should expect that the patients expect a little bit more patience from the physicians in understanding them. And another challenge would be how the physician would treat this newfound knowledge of the patient, which might not be necessarily true, and on how they could work together in aligning which is better for the patient.
Indeed, I think this misinformation is a challenge. And I think something you had mentioned as well, Rod, is what happens when the patient might know more in some ways than the healthcare professional. I've often heard that the patient has like another level of motivation to know as much as they can about their condition or about a loved one's condition. And how does that complicate things?
Well, part of I think our job in advocacy groups is to tell the patient, look, these physicians have worked all their lives for this science. There's always a way, a nice way of telling your doctor that, oh, I learned from the internet, or I learned from our advocacy group, I learned from Rod that there is this new medicine that's being developed. Well, what can you say, doctor? There's always another way of saying things, and not just to get into an argumental point with the physician, but doctor, the internet says like this, like that. No, it doesn't work that way. So you wouldn't get that far with your doctor, as we tell our patients. So the key there is to understand where each is coming from, and to meet somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, I think it's a question of balance, and perhaps this comes back to the infogenia point that Marius mentioned earlier. So a challenge is perhaps the sheer quantity of information that's available online that may be misleading as well. So what are some solutions that you have identified that can help address this issue?
Yes, I think it's important to, as you mentioned, on one side, to be able to provide high quality information. This is very, very important. And it's very important for the patients in the most vulnerable moment they might have immediately after diagnosis or a high suspicion for diagnosis. They should be able to find high quality information. On the other side, is very important, and this is one of the COVID-19 pandemic lessons, is to provide a big quantity of information in order to balance the poor but high volume information that patient can find searching on the internet, on social media, and so on. But this is not an easy task, because in order to be able to build high quality and high volume information about precision oncology, about precision medicine, about cancer in general, this require people skilled, able to understand the medical field, able to understand the science, but also able to communicate about the new advances. This is the reason why 5 years ago we organized a course titled Innovation in Communication, Communication of Innovation, in order to actually to link the two words, the word of health innovation and the word of communication, innovation in communication. So it's not an easy task. Really requires a collaboration that is not easy at all. The collaboration between key opinion leaders, medical doctors, and media. And I don't know how is the case in other countries or other regions, but most of the times we can recognize the same pattern in the relationship between a big professor and the journalist, as it is between the big professor and the patient. Saying that, I'm the big professor, I'm the owner of all the information in the world, you are just a poor journalist, you should listen to me, forget about Twitter and other key opinion leaders, forget about ASCO and ESMO communication. I know best what is good for all patients in the region and in the country. So it's complicated. Yeah, but at least we know how to start, how to proceed, and what is the final outcome.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it's a tricky subject. And continuing on the theme of health literacy, coming back to you, Meryl, is there a kind of a basic level of health literacy do you think is expected from healthcare professionals? From
healthcare professionals or from patients?
Yeah. Or maybe from both.
Yes. Well, healthcare professionals should. Well, they can ask what the basics is from the patient and what the patients need and what the patients want. And for all the information after the diagnosis, I wanted to come back. There should be some kind of basic information for all patients, and they like an iceberg. They can dive deep to get more information if they want, but a lot of patients don't want it. And with the level of diving deeper, then the level can be more complex for the patients. And also for health literacy, it's also important for patients that they can read the clinical trial outcomes, that they can have access to some articles that are now behind a paywall. So there's a lot of information on Google. Dr. Google is very, very helpful, but if the scientific relevant information is not available for patients, then they have to search in a well, sometimes not so clear well.
Thanks for that, Meryl. And Luciana, coming back to you, in preparing for this session, you had mentioned that you had conducted some studies to understand what it takes to increase patient participation in decision-making. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the studies you have done and what you have learned from them.
Elena, we decided to listen our volunteer patients. To do that, we created a board with them. We already selected the more empowered and informed ones. And it was very surprising because right at the beginning of the meeting, they had many doubts about how to identify decision-making moments during their patient journey. And we asked them, can you give me some examples about moments that you already decided, I don't know, can you explain for me what you mentioned? And for us, at the beginning of the meeting, it was necessary to give examples such as, let's remember the time of the surgery. The doctor explained for you different techniques of surgeries. And little by little, they started to understand and share opinions about their situations. So we know that there are three types of decision-making, the paternalistic one, informed and shared. And through this activity, listen to patient, we realized that given the diagnosis, the vast majority opted for paternalistic decision-making at the moment of the diagnosis. They just said, okay, doctor, what I should do? What do you decide? For those who have lived with the disease for a long time, shared decision making was more present. So this also shows us that educational strategies also need to be personalized and appropriated to the moment the patient is experiencing. And another key learning was that the more the patients experience lives in their disease, the more they learn and get involved by sharing their priorities, speaking up and participating more. It was so interesting. We really learned a lot.
That's really interesting, because it's something that we talk about as being so important, but when it comes to a patient group who are, in theory, should be ready to do clinical shared decision making, it sounds like they're not even sure where to begin. So that's really interesting. And perhaps at this moment we can quickly switch. There was a question posted in the Q&A that is on a related topic. The question is, are there any of the panelists aware of globally validated tools or scales that can be used to assess patient readiness to participate in shared decision-making? So what exists out there to be able to assess the readiness level of the patient to actually participate in shared decision-making? And this question is for any of the panelists. I'm just curious to know if you have witnessed anything here that's already out there to be able to make the call of, to be able to assess how ready that patient is to engage.
I know a tool in South Africa to assess the patient's health literacy. So, but for the shared decision making, I don't know.
That's quite interesting that that we are not so aware of tools. I'm interested in the audience, perhaps if you could share your ideas, that could be quite interesting to collect for the rest of the participants. And in the meantime, I will continue. So I have a question. Maybe what we can do is to shift now a little bit more to solutions and what we can do. So I'm quite curious to hear from you, Rod, to understand what role do other stakeholder groups such as caregivers and also patient organizations, what role do they have to play in shared decision-making and promoting shared decision-making?
Well, if I may go back to the topic of basic learning for the patients, I think it's crucial that they learn to ask the right questions about precision medicine, because it's not always, especially in the rural areas, that they have the knowledge about this. Even the advocacy groups, if we will not be involved in an international partnerships with this, we will not know. And more so with the physicians who are at least in the Philippines, they are so busy with their everyday clinics, they have no time to join these events. There's no way for them to be updated with what's going on in the field of precision medicine. So there has to be some efforts both on the side of the patients and the advocacy groups that we must absorb as much as we can from the international field. That's at least in our advocacy group, that's part of our mandate.
So to use the power of the network to be able to keep abreast of what's going on. And Meryl, I'm curious to hear what you think about the influence of family and culture. And is that something that can help with this topic of shared decision making, or is it something that can hinder as well?
Yes, it can be a godsend, but it also can be a burden for the decision making, especially what I hear is if children are joining the parents who are sick in the clinic, and the parents they don't want any treatment anymore, and that's also shared decision making. But the children, they want to have all the options because they don't want to lose their parents. And also in some cultures, it's not allowed to have cancer, and then you're doomed or some. So yeah, it can be very helpful, especially what we see in lung cancer field and in advocacy is that a lot of women are very active and want to know everything and want to share and want to decide for themselves. So even if in surveys, it's always the women who are participating. So maybe if a spouse is getting ill, the wife should be there to advocate for the patient.
That's very interesting to consider differences that gender might play in a topic such as shared decision making. I wanted to, I mean, you mentioned something that the children and parents might have different perspectives and different levels of fatalism, and maybe this brings us to another tricky subject. So this is about ethical challenges. And so what I wanted to do was to invite the panelists to share some other thoughts on what are the current ethical challenges in shared decision making in precision medicine. And for that, to begin this part of the discussion, I wanted to hand that over to Luciana. And if you could perhaps share what you had shared before about maybe some of the challenges in communicating when there might be difficulties in terms of access. So if the patient actually can't access tests or treatment, should they even be aware of it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Elena. Knowing the type of tumor and knowing the type of cancer, of course, is so important for the patient, but it's also for the health system. For the patient, this gives an opportunity to assess the most effective treatments, but for the health system, this helps determine what are the most common types of cancer and thus make decisions based on real-world evidence. But what about if you test, but the medicine is not available? This happens a lot here in Brazil. Should we test only when we have the medicine? This is an important ethical dilemma that we needed to discuss as a society. I really would like to know about you guys. Do we want to know or not to know this information? We have costs involved, of course, but we can also save lives. What is more important?
Can I answer?
Yes, go ahead, Mel.
Definitely test, because whether or not you don't have the availability of the drug, of the medicine, it can be a huge advocacy tool to get to your government to get access to that medicine. And if you don't test, you don't know, and then you don't have data, and policymakers always want to have data of the people who are diagnosed with a certain type of cancer.
Feel free to jump in. You have your hand raised.
Yes, to this point, I would like just to add this example of biomarker testing and the comprehensive genomic profiling. Of course, I think the rational way is to start testing for the biomarkers that are approved by ESMO, by NCCN. And for these biomarkers, of course, are treatments available, reimbursed, and so on. But I think we should use, if the results are negative or cannot drive us to a conclusion, we should use comprehensive genomic profiling, 100 of genes test, that, of course, can come with data related to some treatments that are not available or are not reimbursed, or could be used in an off-label fashion, or the results of the comprehensive genomic profiling could be a very strong indication for a patient to join a clinical trial. And we have more and more evidence, in fact, that based on the genomics data, the first option, the first line of treatment for some type of cancer for a patient is to go for a clinical trial. So I think it's very important to phrase this conversation, and because it's not just about the test, it's not just about the genomics, it's for the people to understand the broad area of clinical trials in terms of opportunities for them, as well. What is different than the previous not so precise era of medicine is that now, based on the results of a comprehensive genomic profiling test, you have strong evidence actually to include the person in a clinical trial. In other words, the potential positive answer to the treatment is clear. So you have very strong evidence on this. And on the other side, we should as well educate not just the patient, but as well doctors and decision makers on the off-label use of data of drugs, which is different than the traditional understanding of the off-label use that is based on the key opinion leaders, the opinion of professors and so on. But this time, going for an off-label treatment is based on data and science. This is the way actually genomics and precision medicine is changing the way we practice medicine. And you can see how many challenges are, in fact, because on one side we have the genomics, and this would be a challenge to set the public agenda for genomics. This is on one side. On the clinical trials, where a lot of discussion, at least in our region, around the clinical trials, so-called experiments, and so on and so forth. So it's, again, a very hot topic, and we should be able to come with the right messages to address the potential barriers that the patient might perceive and might influence their willingness to join a clinical trial and to explain that we have very strong data in favor of him to be part of a clinical trial. And on the other side, as you mentioned, Meryl, we can use this data in order to advocate for a better and faster access to the treatments approved by the EMEA. This is, again, a fact in our region. We should expect around 900 days from the EMA approval by the day when a patient in Romania is receiving an innovative treatment.
Thank you so much for that, Marius. And Rod, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to add to what Marius is saying, or would you have a different perspective to share?
Yeah, still on clinical trials. I think an ethical issue is the limited inclusion or non-inclusion of low-middle income countries in clinical trials. As the chair of the Global Advocacy Group for CML, the CML Advocates Network, I must say a current challenge involves testing in those countries of Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Asia. Most of the clinical trials will have patients from European countries or the US, Canada, because the investigator will most likely be based in these countries. Of course, there are some Asian exceptions, mostly from the first world countries of Japan, China, Singapore, Australia. This is the current environment. Investigators reason that data is readily available and patients and the regulatory environment are mostly cooperative in these countries. Or is it actually because they do not want to be based in these poor countries? So what happens is that there are times the intended number of patients for a clinical trial cannot be met in these countries, in these clinical trials. And the process will have thus setbacks in the process. Meanwhile, countless patients in these low-middle income countries are just waiting to get involved. But without the proper channels, very seldom will they get the chance, which leads us to another paradigm, the interpretation of the results. The FT3 journey will proceed, but is it always safe to say that the end result is representative of the global attributes, where mostly the patient subjects are devoid of non-Caucasians? So that's my thought on the ethical issue.
Indeed, representation is an issue that we continue to discuss a lot in the FT3 program as well. So I think it's really important that we consider that as part of the ethical question. Continuing again on the ethical theme, another question that has come up is, how to manage a situation where, so in shared decision making, the idea is that the patient is able to have more of a say in the decisions that are taken, and how to manage a situation where patients may take decisions that a physician finds it difficult to support. Maybe this comes back to the fatalism point that Marius mentioned before, but I was curious, Meryl, as a patient yourself, what are your thoughts on this? And how should the healthcare professional or patient handle such a situation?
Well, you're owner of your own body. So if you are taking some other steps than the physician is willing to take, but then I think the physician can say, well, if you do this, it's okay because it's for your own, it's your own decision. But it's the same as whether or not there is a medicine and the patient decides, I don't want to swallow a pill, and he decides not to have treatment. In the end, well, you want to have a communication with each other, but in the end, the patient is, well, I think, the owner of his own body.
And Luciana, if we come to you as a psycho-oncologist and a background in bioethics, how do you react to this answer from Meryl?
Yeah, I think we should include the mental health team at all, and also in this discussion, offering support and offering all the different techniques to discuss, because always will end with a decision. And as Meryl said, you can agree or you are not agree. You can decide. And maybe the mental health the team can help a lot.
Thank you for that. And perhaps a final question on this ethics point. And this question would be for Marius. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on how we might be able to balance the responsibility, or how healthcare professionals should balance the responsibility of caring for society versus an individual patient. So what I mean is looking at the outcome of a patient and what they should receive. In the case of a treatment being very expensive, for example, how is a healthcare professional and your medical doctor by training, how should they be handling questions like that, which can be quite tough?
The question it's a very good one, and of course I have seen and heard a lot of medical doctors discussing about health economics, which is interesting. But I think the economics is the only omics science that should not interfere with the decision of a physician, of a medical doctor, when he or she consider to have a certain decision in terms of diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up, and so on. Of course, it's important to use economics, but not necessarily the current health economics analysis, because they are limited actually, and they can measure the benefits of a molecule or the benefits of a test for a population, and that's it. We need different economic models that should include a societal perspective, in fact, and to show how implementing personalized medicine for non-small cell lung cancer, how this approach has societal benefits, not just one or two immunotherapies, one or two targeted therapies, one or two tests, genomic tests, 20 genes, 200 genes. I think is not the way to go. It's important to assess the societal value and the economic value of implementing the personalized medicine in an area, and we measure this. In fact, for non-small cell lung cancer in Romania, we measure what is the socioeconomic benefit of being able to diagnose in 2 months, in 60 days, and not in 6 months, as is is the case currently. And actually, we identify 50 million euro socioeconomic benefits of being able to diagnose all the non-small cell lung cancer patients from our country in 2 months. I think this is the type of analysis we need more, because this will actually lead us, and this is as well part of the National Cancer Control Plan, being able to diagnose in 60 days. And then if you have this target to diagnose in 60 days, all others will come and the system will adapt and will become more and more performant and so on. So I think for a doctor, the issue of cost, this drug is too expensive. And I have seen, and this is quite present in our environment, doctors who do not recommend some test that might cost 1,000 euro, maybe 2,000 euro to the patient, believing that the patient has no money to pay for this type of test not being reimbursed. But I think we should put actually on the table what is relevant from scientific point of view, from clinical practice. This is a reality. Another reality is what is reimbursed in our health system, but you should be able to show to the patient what are the benefits as well for the tests that are not reimbursed, because we cannot rely just on what is reimbursed in order to, to provide the best possible treatment and value for the patients.
Thank you, Marius. This is really interesting, indeed, a tricky subject, ethically speaking. I saw, Rod, your hand was raised. If I'm not mistaken, just briefly, I don't know if that was still something that you wanted to mention or if that moment has passed.
That moment has passed. It's
okay.
beyond the topic already.
Okay, okay, sorry for that. I saw, yeah, Luciana, did you, yes, go ahead.
Well, just to let Marius know that in Brazil, 75% of our population depends on our public health system, and we don't have any type of biomarker available in our public system. And because of that, the doctors are not allowed to mention about it to the patients. So difficult. And I think for us is more than show the results, more than show the how important it is. In our case, we believe that it's necessary to be a mindset change. The political, our government needs to agree that the precision medicine completely changed the way to do oncology. So important and also so difficult.
Thank you so much for that, Luciana. I'm just checking the chat because there are some questions coming in, a lot of questions actually, so perhaps we can take a couple of them now. So I have one question from Bertrand. Is there strong evidence available that demonstrates the benefit of shared decision-making on patients' health, adherence, satisfaction, economics, and so on? There's a question open to the panel. I don't know if anyone here has any experience of any strong evidence to prove the benefit of shared decision-making.
Yes.
Meryl.
Well, if you are a patient and you have to choose between two kind of treatment options that there are available for you, and the one is that you have more have a year to live, and the other is that you have a half year to live but in very good condition, that you can do everything. These are options that are available, and so if you are communicating with your doctor, and if you are knowing what the consequences are, knowing what the side effects are, knowing everything, then you can make a decision that is your decision. And even if you don't want a treatment, everything comes to taking control of your own life. So, and that makes you happy, more happy.
Thanks for that, Meryl. There are many questions coming in, so I'm going to try to pick some out, and we do have time, so we can take them one by one. So there was a question from Loda: do we need a specific tool to assess the shared decision-making ability of patients? And what about assessing the physicians first? So I don't know who can take that one. If that's a question for Marius potentially, or anyone else in the panel.
Of course, we need guidelines and so on, but I think it's important to start from the reality, from some very good examples. And I'm sure that if we'll go in this direction of having guidelines actually for everything, we should have guidelines, at least in my country, at least 8 guidelines. Why? Because Romania is a big country. There are 8 regions, and these 8 regions are quite different. Not to say that inside of the same regions are actually counties that are different one by the other, and people are different, and the cultural factor are different, and so on and so forth. So it's quite complicated, I think, to think to have a guideline on the decision making process with the patient engagement at the same level of depth and scientific evidence as there are clinical guidelines. Would not be the case, because we are too different, I think, in terms of cultural background, socioeconomic environment, individual behavior, and so on. But I think the idea to build best cases scenarios and to around them to build at the local level and the hospital level, I don't know, the national level, this conversation, I think this could be a good way to go.
Thank you very much, Marius, for that. I have another question, and perhaps this one could be for Rod. We'll see. The question is, to what extent are healthcare professionals familiar with health literacy principles, and do you believe there is a need to train healthcare professionals systematically about the health literacy principles?
Well, the common notion is that the patients are the ones that are to be educated, but sometimes, especially in the rural areas, the physicians must also be updated with the latest out there. So that's where some of advocacy groups would pitch in. We were telling the patients, look, we got back from this event, and we learned about this. Again, you have to advise your attending physician that there's this app that tells about evidence-based studies that might reconsider from the patient's perspective about their common treatment for us. That's the most we could do. I agree with Marius that there can be no guidelines, but the most we can do is to probably influence the thinking process because of evidence-based studies we conducted ourselves. For example, in chronic myeloid leukemia, when you are, let's say, when you are in a hopeless case already, you're in stage 4, but there's no stage 4, just the hopeless case. We on the other side, what is considered a cure because of the advancement in medicine is what we call treatment-free remission, wherein for a number of years you have been taking this medicine, and now you're in a stage wherein the levels are so good that you could actually stop. But the physicians would take this with a very large grain of salt. They wouldn't believe. So what we did was to have a evidence-based study from our so many thousands of patients globally that says, yes, probably 50% would go on without remission just by stopping the treatment. So we are slowly influencing the environment because of shared decision making in terms of some, let's call, evidence that we have.
Thank you so much for that, Rod. So perhaps continuing on this theme of what can be done, we will be making you work again in a second. But before then, I have a question for Meryl. Meryl, what is a small step to meaningfully implement shared decision-making in practice?
Well, we're doing now a project in our hospital, and the small things that are working is use not words, use infographics, use drawings, use videos, use everything, and how do you call I don't know the word anymore, but get access, and also for patients to have access to the clinical trial outcomes, so that they know what the grade 1 and 2 side effects are, so that they are more informed and can build their skills to be in the shared decision making process. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Meryl. So in fact, what we would like to do next is to ask the same question to all of you. So you get to be the respondents now. Nicole, if we could go back to the slides. And so we will do the same as before. So we'll ask you to join us at slido.com. You can use the QR code, or you can use the code that is marked there. And the question is, in a few words, what other small steps should be taken to meaningfully implement shared decision-making in clinical practice? And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. We will give you a couple of minutes to respond there. So we're seeing use of infographics and patient-friendly materials, improve communication between healthcare professionals and patients. It'd be interesting to hear how we can improve communication. Needs to be recognized as important and embedded in healthcare professional training. That's interesting. That's something we have heard in the FT3 program as well. A simple discussion guide. About training. That's great. Lots of ideas coming in. For patients and healthcare professionals alike. Maybe what could be interesting here is parallel education, where we can educate the both at the same time with the same materials or similar materials that work together. Standards. Consider commercial impact earlier on. Educational campaigns. Great. Well, we will leave this open. So if you have other ideas, feel free to add that to the list. And what I wanted to do, just to end with the panelists, I have a closing question for all of you. And my question for you is, taking a look at these responses, what are your reactions and what is your key takeaway from the discussion today? And perhaps we can start with Rod, as you're the first one on my screen. What is your key takeaway?
Yeah, well, what hit me was what I found in the Slido, the possibility of patients having a discussion. Yes, there is a possibility, of course. I'm so surprised. There's always that possibility, but like what we say, what happens? You wait outside the physician's clinic for 2 hours, 3 hours, only for what? Only for a 10-minute session with him. So you must know how to ask the right questions. Otherwise, there would be no educated discussion between the two of you. And also, it's not always on us barking that the physician should have patience on his side in talking to us. No, we must also learn how to educate ourselves. It's about us. So only then can we have a close bond with our physician, so it would be on a more personal level. They are looking at tens of patients per day, so we must understand their predicament from our side, and hopefully they will also from our side. And just one last note, if governments are planning to procure a innovative medicine, of course, it has to undergo HTA. And the more the patients are involved in the HTA process, at least in my country, the more chances of success that the medicine will be procured by the government, because there's some patient involvement in the whole process.
Thank you very much for that summary, Rod. Luciana, would you like to share your final thoughts?
Yes, Elena, I think a lot of ideas, but I think two are really important. And we are going to still educating the patients and getting them prepared. And I believe that education required at least two important strategies. One is best quality information, and also the patient support. I think the Mirel voice is so important. We have our Mirels in Brazil. We have our lung cancer patients as volunteering with us in Brazil, and we know how important it is, the connection patient to patient, for the new patients to really receive the best information from patients. And we are also working closer to the doctors, because they really can understand. It's important for them to understand how important it can be to collaborate with us. We as NGOs can really offer a lot of different types of services, different types of service that they cannot offer. They cannot offer. So thank you again for this opportunity, Elena.
Thank you. And Marius, what would you like to share as your key takeaways from the session today?
Yes, first of all, it was a very, very intense discussion. And I'm a bit surprised because nobody pronounced the keywords artificial intelligence in order to help share decision making, which is quite strange because AI is actually everywhere in all the discussion. And of course, beyond the joke, there is a role for digital tools, for AI, for this type of intelligence. But I think it's important to combine this type of intelligence with cognitive intelligence. And I mentioned how important it is to assess from your perspective the educational level of a patient in front of you. So the traditional IQs should be considered as well, the educational level. What is very important as well is the emotional IQ and empathy. I think the empathy could be a key to open actually any doors, and empathy is actually in the inner center of each of us, and we should be able just to to discover, and the empathy could lead us to, of course, to very good results. And as well, I think are very important the networking IQ, the way you as a professional are in the right network, and the network can influence you in order to have a better understanding of the science of the medical practice, and as well of the patients. Maybe you have not have enough time, but your network, your professional network can help you with this. And the fifth IQ is the social IQ, because and was a comment in the chat to include the social dimension in this discussion about shared decision making. So for me, the keyword is I think empathy. And last week I actually seen a paper, a very good one, showing that the empathy can be actually assessed by a single cell assessment in the human brain. So we can go with the omics to understand as well the empathy. So thank you once again for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marius. And I see a lot of people reacting to your words in the chat, which is
Oh my
great.
God.
And finally, Meryl, I just see if there's anything else that you would like to add. Closing
Yes.
remarks.
Besides the education and empathy, I think education should come after the question what the patient wants. If the patient wants to be educated, if the patient wants to be engaged. But for me, I always tell other patients, take ownership of your own life, of your own disease, and ask questions and be brutal and be be annoying for your doctor, but you are owner of your life, and he goes after 10 minutes, he has his other patients, and so you have to advocate for yourself.
Thanks, Meryl. And I think with those words is a perfect ending to the panel. I wanted to say thank you very much to the panelists. I hope you agree that this is a fantastic discussion and an excellent selection of professionals here. So thank you so much to Rod, Meryl, Luciana, and Marius. I also wanted to mention that this topic of shared decision-making is something that we continue to work on in FT3. In fact, this panel was really the first moment to really start to understand the issue a little bit more, and we will continue to work on it. We would encourage you to go to our website, from testing to targeted treatments.org, for more information, or if you'd be interested in participating in this work. And there will be a follow-up survey sent out. So we do encourage you to participate in that. And I also saw that there were some comments in the chat asking for a copy of the links that were shared, and we can certainly share that after this session as well. So I wanted to thank everyone for participating, and thank you again for the panelists, and thank you very much for a great discussion.